Good morning. Today we'll look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 18. Paul is talking to the people here in this city of Corinth, in this church that he planted, and has been encouraging them and chastising them a little bit, pointing out things that they're doing incorrectly. There's constructive criticism, and there's just plain old scolding, and if you want to influence somebody, you're better off to give them examples, and rather than just point out the wrongs, but point out maybe how they could be doing things or could be improving things anyway. And he starts here. He's warning the people of Corinth not to get overconfident in their salvation just because of who they are. He says, I don't want you to be unaware that our ancestors were all under the cloud. I mean, Paul is going to talk to them a lot from the book of Numbers here, and some from Exodus. They were all under the cloud. They were all passed through the sea. They were all baptized by Moses. And so he's using the example of being freed from captivity in Egypt and being led by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and the parting of the Red Sea, and how they were baptized into being believers, baptized into God's salvation and God's safety, by the waters of Moses, the waters of the spreading of the waters there. And then, there's a reference to all drank of the same spiritual drink. They drank from that spiritual rock. When they were thirsty in the desert, they were crying out, and God had Moses strike this rock, and water came from the rock. And, so this was the entire Jewish Israelite community. I mean, there weren't Jews that were somewhere else, because this Jewish community are the descendants of Abraham, the descendants of Joseph and Jacob, and Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is their story, and so the majority of the people, the pure Israelites, were of that descent, and Paul is reminding them that all of that ancestor stuff isn't what saves us. But even though God led them, even though God provided for them, they rebelled. It says, nevertheless, verse 5, nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and they were struck down in the wilderness. These things occurred as an example for us. There's a saying, you can't learn from other people's mistakes. Well, we can. We learn from other people's examples. We learn, from history. Hopefully we learn from history anyway, that, to change, to become better at who we are. But, history proves over and over and over that, wars really don't solve things. I mean, all they do is cause more conflict and damage. But, but Paul is saying, we need to look at how God led our ancestors and what happened to our ancestors when they rebelled against God. And so, he's verse 7, verse 6, these occurred for examples for us, so that we may not desire evil as they did. And then, do not become idolaters, as some of them did. As it was written, they sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. And the next one, we must not put Christ to the test, as some did, and were destroyed by the serpent. So Paul is referring to different instances in the book of Numbers of, like with the serpents. I mean, God didn't take the serpents away. What did God do? God had Moses make this staff with the serpent on it, and the people would look up to that and would be healed. He didn't take the problem away. He issued a solution to the problem. And with the 29,000 fell in a single day, because of the sexual immoralities and stuff there, I mean, you go back to Numbers chapter 25, and we can read that story. And in verse 10, do not complain as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer. I mean, remember about the story of the Exodus, how the people, you know, I mean, they were excited to begin with. At least I'm assuming they were excited to be set free from this slavery and captivity, because, you know, their yoke was, their job, their burden was almost overwhelming of what they were required to do, to perform every day. And so to be set free and to have the promise that God is going to lead them to the land of milk and honey, you know, to fulfill their dreams. But, you know, it wasn't long, and they were complaining. They were not happy. And how many of us do that too? I mean, we've got it pretty good. I mean, we got to admit that. We have it pretty good. But yet we'll complain, and we'll wish for more. And, you know, and so it's, you know, to follow the laws, to do what God would have us do, to rejoice in God's salvation, rather than to take advantage of the situations. You know, I've got verses 11, 12, and 13 underlined. These things happened to them to serve as an example, and they were written down to instruct us, on whom the ends of the ages have come. So if you think you're standing, watch out that you don't fall. No testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. I mean, there isn't, I can't imagine that there is anything brand new that somebody else in the world hasn't lived through. You know, I mean, think about the story of Job, how he lost everything. You think about so many things in the Bible. Moses, I mean, Elijah, I mean, these prophets, these people for God, that, I mean, their lives weren't perfect. There was something that happened. There was been sickness. Think of all the healing that Jesus did. I mean, and we've come a long way, you know, since that time. Although some of the vaccines we have now, that, you know, people are saying, I'm not going to vaccinate my kids against smallpox and chickenpox and la-di-da-di-da, and then boom, all of a sudden we have a resurgence of that, and you know, leprosy is showing up again in some places. What's going on? I mean, you know, we need to learn a lesson from the past, and to remember that, you know, anything that's going on, anything that happens, you know, whether it's a hurricane, a flood, drought, hailstorms, I mean, it's happened to someone before. There is, I can't imagine something that is totally unique, that is, you know, I mean, there are extremely odd circumstances, granted, but, you know, we've all been sick. We've all been something gone on that way, and so just remember that, you know. And then the next thing he says, God is faithful. And, you know, and he says he won't let you be tested beyond your strength, but with the testing provides the way out. You know, so he doesn't say that God won't test you. It says God will not allow you to be tested beyond your strength. And, you know, we all have problems in life. We're all going to have struggles. But it's not God doing the testing. It's not God giving us the problems. It's not God giving us to see how much we can handle. But God is providing us with the strength and with the endurance and with the promise and the hope of the future to be able to live through it. And it's, I mean, there are no perfect and easy answers all the time, but we're to remember that we are to learn from history, and we are to go forth. And so now he's been talking that way. In verse 14, he starts with therefore. You know, therefore, since all of this has been gone on in our past and is happening to us, therefore, flee from the worship of idols. You know, I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourself. You know, the cup will be blessed. The cup of blessing is not the blessing of Christ. Is the bread and the wine that we drink not the body and blood of Christ? Are the blessings from God? These are what we are a part of. You know, it's verse 17, because there is one bread, we who are many are one body, you know, and we are community. We work together to encourage each other, to challenge each other to be better, and to point out the wrongs in a compassionate and forgiving and in a way that is not off-putting, but to be very, cautious and welcoming, and to learn and to encourage others to live rightly, to encourage others to know God and to be generous and kind and all of those those Boy Scout traditions that we would have. But so far in this chapter, I mean, Paul has reminded us through the warnings of history and encouraged us in living as best we can.